having the ability to say you have a partnership with a big name corporate is huge, right? Because it suggests to people that this big corporate who are like the real deal have done their due diligence on you and have chosen you out of the myriads of other.
How do you build corporate relationships as a startup? What's the importance of these? Why can they help you scale faster? How do you get your foot in the door? How do you convert these relationships so they actually become a financial gain for you? In order to answer these questions, we've got an expert with us today, Lara Naqushbandi, and she's going to give you her tips and tricks. She's a co-founder of ETFuels and previously had a large and successful corporate career, including being Director of Lifestyle Retail at Google. And this episode is powered by HSBC Innovation Banking. Please make sure you subscribe to us so we can continue to scale and keep making videos just like this. So, Lara, so great to have you here today. And I think this topic is really important because I find so many founders we talk to are really focused on getting individual customers, but corporates are so important too. Can you go into a bit more detail about why it's so important for founders and startups to pay attention to corporates and what corporates could potentially do?
I think one of the differences is, we all relate to consumers because we all think about what we want, whereas the idea of having to engage the suits in the corporate office, like boring, right? But I think, I found in my business and just in generally, right, there are 2 or 3 things that corporates can give you, which are potentially game changers for your business, right? And so if you can get over the hurdle of having to deal with the suits, there's a real prize there. So if I think about what those have been for us, right? So the first thing, right, when you start your startup, you're basically a PowerPoint, and maybe you've got a cat that's like giving you moral support. So it's really hard to differentiate yourself amongst the myriad of other people with their pets and their PowerPoints. And so having the ability to say you have a partnership with a big name corporate is huge, right? Because it suggests to people that this big corporate who are like the real deal have done their due diligence on you and have chosen you out of the myriads of other, like wannabes out there. So brand name and credibility costs them nothing and is huge potentially for your business. That's one. The second, and this is kind of the obvious one, is if it actually is like if you are doing a B2B type business, or even if you've got some other sort of mode of partnership, corporates are amazing to help you scale, right? They've got the infrastructure, they've got the people, they've got the expertise, and they've got the resources, right? And so if you're trying to think about how do I go from 0 to 100 in 5 minutes, corporates can do that for you. And then the third thing, which I think is really interesting, is corporates now all have like an innovation agenda. I mean, they're all trying to fail fast and be agile and whatever else, right? And the reality is some of them can do that and most of them can't, but they do have an innovation agenda, and there'll be some team somewhere in the corporate whose role is to do R&D or partner with startups or learn more about the evolving ecosystem. So they are incentivized to find startups and partner with them. And sometimes those teams oftentimes those teams have a budget. So of course, we're always chasing for cash in the startup world. And so corporates are often a good source of resource. And they can also give you that cash on far more favorable terms than, some sort of shark eater like VC might. So those are the things that I think can be really helpful about the corporate partnerships.
You've also been really successful at creating those partnerships and working with corporates as well. And that's not the case for so many people we talk to. When people are thinking about this, like maybe trying to work with corporates, what are some of the common hurdles you see people face that they can't quite surmount?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I've worked in the corporate world for like my entire career, apart from this brief stint doing the startup, right? And the biggest issue, and I'm talking generically about, I've worked at Google, right? And everyone says, oh, Google's super agile, super innovative. Trust me, people at Google complain about the same things that they did at, that 120-year-old mining company that I worked at, right? Corporates have a hell of a lot of process and they are generally risk averse, right? So if you're like a startup founder trying to get your stuff done, like hustling away, like they can be a real headache. And I read a good quote on LinkedIn the other day, my basic source of reading, and it was if you're like doing a startup, to succeed, you just need one person to say yes, right? Somebody should give you a bit of cash to believe in you, whatever. If you're in a corporate, to get anything done, you actually need nobody to say no. So the challenge with corporates is, how do you navigate that decision-making process and find out like the way to get nobody to say no, so you can get on and build your relationship or do whatever you want to do. I've got some tips and tricks I can share, but that's the biggest, I think, challenge, is getting nobody to say no.
I'm not sure if you told me that quote recently, because I feel like I've heard that. Maybe I saw the same LinkedIn post you did.
I told you yesterday, mate. Like, what's going on?
It must be you, yeah. So as you said, that you've got some tips and tricks that you've been able to do to like get ahead of so many other people, right? ETFuels have been going for that long. We've been able to create these huge partnerships already. How have you done that? What tips have you used? What can you help the audience with?
Yeah, well, it's very kind. By the way, here's my cat. Like, I do have my PowerPoint of my cat, but I'm going to try and get rid of it. Sorry, she wasn't invited. So look, I mean, I think so. That the key with the corporate is to understand the decision-making process and who's involved with that, and what do you need to do to navigate that. So my first tip is, you need to find a sponsor in that organization who's going to be your friendly face to help you get through that, right? And when you approach a corporate, I mean, often they've got like zillions of divisions, and just because you find someone who's not interested doesn't mean that the other divisions won't be. So find somebody who could be your sponsor. And typically that person might be, I'm generalizing, right? But it's someone whose job description somehow involves doing something innovative, because this person needs to be getting paid to basically find cool stuff to do, right? And to take risk and to try out things. So that's one, right? So find your sponsor. The second thing is, once you've found your sponsor, you need to make sure that at some point, once you've got your sponsor comfortable with what you're doing, that you have the right decision makers and that you're engaging with them. You've got a man mark or woman mark or whatever, right? So I typically find, and again, it depends on what your business is, but you've got your sponsor. It's always really useful at some point to make sure you meet the finance person, because if you want cash out of this corporate, you need to look that person in the eye, convince them of your credibility, and engage with them. Because if they're not in the room, that means that somebody else is trying to sell you on behalf of you, and that's not always as effective. So find the finance person, find ideally the P&L owner of whatever business you're trying to engage with as well. So those are kind of the bits, the essential stakeholders, and they're likely to be others, but make sure you've got some way of engaging with those. And I like to think about, once you're working with a corporate, making sure that you have very clear milestones and processes. They like to know when they have to make decisions, who needs to be there. And so when I engage with a corporate, like, we'll pitch the idea, and then my second thing is, okay, who else do I need to pitch to? And then what is my process, understanding their decision-making process from first pitch to, okay, then this person needs to see, then that person needs to see, then we have a committee to decide, blah, blah, blah. And so mapping out that timeline is also really important. And then I think the fourth thing I would say, and I will stop because I could keep going on, but the fourth thing I would say is, you have to get the balance right between being patient and making them feel some pain at some point. What I mean by that is, corporates are risk averse. They're not just going to you're not just doing one pitch, then you get your way and you've got whatever you need from them. You've got to figure out a way to build a relationship with them. And often that might be sharing some insight with them, like providing them free stuff, right? Everyone likes, free research, free insight, free whatever, and building a little bit of a cadence so you can keep coming back. Maybe it's bi-weekly catch up or whatever, but getting some cadence in where you're giving them free stuff that costs you nothing, normally insights or something like that, or introducing them to your product, whatever it is, and making sure you've got that over time. But at some point, and typically I would say that's typically after the 3-month mark, you have to make them feel some pain to know they're serious. So what I mean by that is, one thing that we sometimes push for is to say, okay, we've spent 3 months, working with you on this initiative. Can you now sign something with us? Because if they have to sign something, they normally have to send it to the legal department, even if it's completely tame. And making somebody do that is like a sign that they really want to work with you. Or maybe another one that I've seen used is, we want to be onboarded as one of your suppliers, because the onboarding process is super complex. So to make them do that, again, it's another sign that they want to. If even more, you can say, can you maybe kick in 50K for this pilot? Even better. So getting them to feel some pain after you've invested in them, that's a way to make sure you're not wasting your time and 2 years later you've spend all your time with someone who's going nowhere. So those are my key ones.
You mentioned a few different interesting things there. So when I come back to right at the beginning, you mentioned about finding your sponsor. And I think it's something people really struggle with, because it's just that social intelligence aspect, right? Of like, how do you, one, find the right person, but then also not repel them away from you, right? So how are you able to find the sponsor and then make them pay attention to you, right? How did you get them to have that chat with you and want to have the chat with you?
So I think, it's a great question, right? Because the question is like, why is this person going to, waste their time with you, right? So I have typically found like the reason that these corporates have these innovation teams or that they engage with startups is typically because they want insight into some part of the value chain that is changing, and you're probably sitting in that part of the value chain. And so I'll give you the example of my business, and then people can see if they can convert it to what's relevant for them. So our business, we've been looking at, we're developing green fuels, and we've done a lot of work looking at the technology suppliers for these green fuels and figuring out how much it costs to produce these green fuels. So we were right in there, like talking every day to like technology suppliers. So we had really good insight on how the technology was evolving. And we also had like real life insight on how much it cost to produce this stuff, because we were trying to produce it. And so when we engage with corporates, they sort of read some McKinsey report that says green fuels will cost $1,000 per ton to produce, and there'll be 10 million tons in production by 2027. We can come in and say, look, we've actually got quotes from Siemens, from whoever else, other suppliers. We've done the numbers, and actually it's not going to cost $1,000, it's going to cost 1,500. And here's why. And so the best way to engage, most people come in, they want to try and pitch their product, right? Which is one way, but you need to also be able to provide some sort of intelligence to make yourself really compelling and interesting for them to want to engage with you. And also shows you're credible too, if you know what you're talking about. So I'd sort of say drip feeding bits of, pearls of wisdom is another way to like really, get corporates to take you seriously and spend time with you.
I think one of the things we're trying to do ourselves is we've now got this huge database of British Asian entrepreneurs and people in that space. We're going to start creating our own unique data. And obviously that's one way for us to then show that value to other people too. Just another example for the audience. And you said so many good things there. So one of the other things you mentioned as well is about how you want to make them feel some pain. And one of the things I think is often quite scary for many founders is it feels like such a David Goliath situation, right? Of here's this massive corporation, and it feels like they have all of the power. And when you give them free stuff, how do you know when to stop giving them free stuff? Because then you're trying to build that relationship, but then they can just keep taking without really having any intention of following through. So how do you manage that part?
Look, there's no right answer, right? It's kind of one of those things like, how do you know like you're exclusive? Like once you've gone, some of my friends say apparently 9 months you've got away. I don't know. I'm happily married. Well, I'm not necessarily happily married. I'm married, but like the point being, I think it's a balance, and I think realistically, expecting a corporate to do anything within 3 months is unrealistic. It's just, maybe you'll be lucky and you'll find some avenue, but generally it's just like it will take at least 3 months for them to actually, meet you 3 or 4 times at most, and talk about what you're doing to their other stakeholders. So don't expect anything, I would say, within 3 months. If you're still like faffing around with them after 6 months and you haven't seen them go through any pain, as I would call it, they're probably not going anywhere. Right. And so, I think definition of pain can be lots of different things. It could be as simple as I want to have a meeting with your boss's boss. Right. Nobody wants to pull in their boss's boss for like some joker meeting. So you've got to figure out what pain means for your situation. But if you are sitting there with 6 months having passed and you've only spoken to one person at that organization and they're just milking you for intel, waste of time. So I think it's between that 3 to 6 months, figuring out what how you get over into that sort of next level of relationship is kind of the right time to push.
Yeah, that makes like a huge amount of sense. And I think that helps a lot of people as well, just to get that level of where it is. Because like you said, it's almost like a relationship exactly where I think people are very, very awkward at that part, right? And you mentioned a few other tips and tricks there as well. So when it's the case of like finding the right people and getting to meet other people in the firm, so you mentioned about finding a finance person, do you ask the people that you already know to introduce you to them, or do you try and do those relationships independently?
Oh, great question. Yeah. Super important in corporates is to make sure that you are, what's the right word? That you are, that the right people are looped into the right conversations. So I would say if you have gone in with a particular sponsor or a particular introduction, you should always make sure that that particular person knows or is ideally guiding you through that organization, as opposed to starting with one person, then going to another person, because nobody likes to be surprised at how conversations you're having on the side with their colleagues. So yeah, great question. And I should have mentioned that. It's always really important to sort of show a lot of love to your sponsor and ideally help go via them, and always keep them informed, and always, really manage that relationship very carefully, particularly with their peers and their colleagues.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode so far. A quick note from our sponsors who make this all possible. From first-time founders to the funds that back them, innovation needs different. HSBC Innovation Banking is proud to accelerate growth for tech and life science businesses, creating meaningful connections and opening up a world of opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors alike. Discover more at hsbcinnovationbanking.com. Back to the show. What about if that first person you meet, maybe you don't get the right vibe from them, you feel like they're just fobbing you off? Do you then kind of abandon that client for the time being and maybe try again later? Or do you try and find somebody else to become the sponsor?
Yeah, I would definitely say the latter. So I think, one of the challenges with corporates is that there are so many divisions. And 98% of the time, 98% of the people that you might think are relevant just don't care about what you're doing because they've got other jobs. That doesn't mean that the 2% of people that you haven't yet contacted aren't the exact right people to be engaging with. So typically I find if someone's not interested, I would so when I reach out, I do a lot of LinkedIn stalking and, second connections or even third connections sometimes. And I always say, you or someone else in your organization, because you don't want to, if there is, they may be able to pass you on to someone else. So keep that window open. If they do come back and they're like, no, not interested, I would go again. And if I hadn't asked the first time, say, is there anyone else who might be? But then I wouldn't go back to that person because I think, they've obviously got a different job role, and just find another avenue. The other thing that's also a useful thing to do is to look at whether which corporates are doing stuff with your competitors. Because if they're engaging in, green fuels with some other startup over here, they're probably likely to engage with us and say, we look at what we see in the trade press as well, quite extensively.
I like that as well, because it's, if somebody messaged me and they said, oh, is there somebody else that you know in the organization? What you're doing for them is that's less work for them. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. You should chat to that person. But they might not say that name unless you've asked them that, right? So you're not actually asking very much of them if they're just saying a name. They don't even have to make the introduction, I guess, right?
Exactly. And that's what I often see. They won't even send the email. They'll just be like, reach out to that person, and it's an easy win for us. And yeah.
As those relationships are growing as well, right? So let's say you've got somebody you feel like is going pretty well. And then when it gets to that finance team, that decision maker, there's that holding point there. What things have you done in order to be able to get something from almost there to just push over the tipping point just that bit further?
Yeah. So I guess I'm deeply biased towards the importance of engaging and managing finance people, because I spent most of my life in that sort of world. And I would say with the finance person, the analysis that they always do is, what is the value impact of doing this thing versus doing nothing, and versus my alternatives? And so when you do engage with a finance person, you need to be always thinking, not just here's my brilliant idea, it'll make you loads of money, but you need to be put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, this is the value that my product can bring to you. You need to have some sort of an insight as to what their alternatives are and what kind of value those alternatives, risk reward that those alternatives can bring. And then you also need to be able to compare all of that to doing nothing, right? Because that's typically what a corporate will do, is do nothing. And so when people, I think on the finance piece, people often get all intimidated by, I don't know how to calculate an NPV or what's an IRR. I mean, whatever. That doesn't matter. The key is to be able to structure your argument as, these are the pros and cons of what I'm doing. These are the pros and cons of your alternatives. And these are the pros and cons of doing nothing. And obviously making sure that your solution is the superior one.
And you mentioned there about LinkedIn stalking as well. And how much of that, so you're looking at these different people and trying to work out who's the right person to contact. Have you got any tips for anybody there about like how to make sure that those people accept your requests or answer your messages as well? So you mentioned about giving them insight. Is there anything else you've done that could maybe help?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say I'm like a champion LinkedIn stalker. I just use quantity as a weapon. So I do have that, the expensive thing where you got to pay and you've got but I think it's really useful. I mean, I've got value out of it, right? I would also say obviously going via people that you have second connections with, even if it's some like second connection you don't actually know, it does actually help say we have this connection and, but I typically find I'm a deep because you don't really know what people do in corporates. Being broad
sometimes they don't know what they do either.
Yeah, well, exactly. Does anyone know what they do? I don't know. I'm trying to find that person who's cracked it. So yeah.
And so you generally think about going through that method rather than going through warm intros, or if you know.
I love warm intros. I love warm intros, and I have to say, people have been like the most brilliant warm intros for me have been actually other founders and other entrepreneurs because they know the struggle is real. So leverage your Bay community, your other startup colleagues, because I think those have been the most useful for me actually.
And the other part of all of this too, right, is that sometimes people come from the corporate world. What they're hit by is all the stuff that they don't know how to do, right? About some of those early processes, that scrappy bit. But you've also learned so much from being at a corporate, you've transferred really well to being the founder. Can you, for the people listening right now who are in a corporate job, who think about quitting their job someday, can you make them feel happy that maybe they do have a chance of transferring their skills? How has it helped you climbing the corporate ladder? I mean, look, I'm permanently insecure about, I think they say that the best founders are the ones that have done it and failed. And I mean, maybe it's great that I haven't failed, but I also haven't done it. I'm always insecure about not having that startup experience. But what has been helpful is obviously knowing how to navigate corporate partnerships, perhaps, in a different way. I think the other thing, working at a corporate, the challenge with a startup is always like, at what point do we put process in versus just like going for where the opportunity is and running around and changing our minds all the time. And I think, corporates, they do know generally what best practice process looks like, right? And so, whether that's like how we onboard people or how we think about allocating our budget in a disciplined way. The biggest thing I think as well, is just being able to put together sort of a strategic plan. But those sort of, skills that when you're at a corporate, you don't really realize you've actually picked up, but just that kind of discipline about running a business, I think that's been quite helpful. So you're one of the first founders to come on this Lab podcast, and you're going to be on the Bay podcast soon as well. But before we wrap up and go to the quick fire questions and talk about some other stuff as well, could you tell me as well, what is it that ETFuels does? And what are your dreams and ambitions so that the audience can check out that?
Sure. So we are developing projects to produce green fuels. And these green fuels are basically substitutes for oil, predominantly, and they can power ships, aeroplanes, that stuff. So the thing that we're doing that is a little bit different, I think, is to produce these green fuels, you take renewable energy, you use the electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you can basically use the hydrogen as an energy source for powering different vehicles and just different processes, right? And the biggest challenge, broadly, I'm going to get on my soapbox here, but if we think about everyone wants to decarbonize, right? And we're like, let's do loads of renewable energy and let's electrify everything, electric cars, electric houses, electric. The biggest challenge with that strategy is that the electricity grids that were designed, tens of years ago, never envisioned a world where we'd be electrifying everything that we use. So you've got these old grids which just are not fit for purpose. And if you were to go and try and build a wind farm or a solar power farm or something like that and try and get a connection onto that grid, you could struggle and you would be waiting for years. And that's particularly the case in Europe and the US, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, screw the grid. We're going to take all of that amazing renewable energy, and turn it straight into fuel at source without going on the grid. So we basically take the renewable electricity, run it straight into our factory without a grid connection, and then that allows us to produce these fuels far cheaper at bigger scale and so on. So that's what we're up to. And you can check our website out as well if you wish.
Can you, with the corporate side of that, right? How does that exactly plug in? So what's the ideal scenario in, say, like 5 years' time, 10 years' time with that corporate relationship? Like what corporate relationship work for you the best?
Yeah, well, so these projects, to build like a massive wind farm or solar farm and then build a massive green hydrogen factory, you need a whole bunch of corporate, they're quite massive, right? So each project's going to cost us around 800 million euros, right? So there's a significant amount of investment. And to put that together, you need a whole bunch of corporate partnerships. So we need a corporate to supply us with our feedstock, one of which is CO2. So we need to have industrial partnerships with cement companies or steel companies. So we've got a couple of those. You also need customers, and typically our customers are large shipping companies. It's a B2B business, so you need to have customers who believe in you and who are willing to enter into long-term offtake agreements. And then, of course, for the supply chain to actually build the stuff, you need companies like Siemens to enter into sort of deep partnerships with you to help you build, all of these different parts of the value chain. So we spend a lot of time talking to these sort of large industrial corporates to try and get our projects off the ground.
That sounds amazing. So I guess the other thing too is, like, when do you know that a corporate isn't a right fit for you? Maybe they're really interested in you, but you just think, actually, this isn't what's going to take us forwards. And questions people be asking themselves, because sometimes I think people maybe get really obsessed by the name value of the brand, but it might actually be a detriment to them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because we had that experience too. So when we started, we thought that oil and gas companies would be ideal partners for us because they all want to decarbonize. They have kind of the skill set to make fuels, right? That's what they do. And they have the customer base and all of that. And so we spent a lot of time talking to some companies who shall not be named. And they'd always want a meeting. They'd always be happy to chat to us, but it was like an information suck. And, we'd never get anything back. It was always, why don't we have another chat and talk about your current cost structure? It's like, well, hang on, what's going on here, And so I think, what we sort of realized was the fact that we weren't getting anything back and the fact that it was always just information, it's kind of a waste of time. And also, I guess, just looking at their sort of strategic imperatives, there just wasn't really an alignment when we really challenged ourselves on it because, we're trying to basically do things to displace fuel oil as opposed to, enhance that business. So it wasn't the best fit. Whereas some of the other relationships we've had, like with the cement companies and with the shipping companies who genuinely need businesses like ours to decarbonize, those work really well. So it's when you get that sense when it's just an information suck that it's just not going anywhere.
So we're going to now move into quick fire questions. So first one is, who are 3 British Asians that you'd love to spotlight that you think are doing incredible work?
Okay. Well, so my first is one of your previous guests, Salim Chowdhury. So Salim, incredible background. He has been, MD at Textiles UK. Why is he incredible? This guy has seen so many startup situations and he has an amazing brain to pattern recognize that literally every situation that I've come across, that I don't know what to do, Salim can give me like 20 times that he's seen it and then generally how things work out. So, and he's incredibly generous with his time and with his insights. So Salim, brilliant, generous, and somewhat funny, not that funny. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, Salim's one. Second person I would shout out is a guy called Khurram Hussain, who is a headhunter, actually. He's a partner at an organization called Warren Partners. Warren Partners, I shout them out because they are doing some really awesome work in the diversity space. I mean, look, I'm a woman. Like everybody has like some women initiative, and that's great, right? I love it, right? We've got to reverse, like whatever. But there just isn't. And look, your podcast, right? I mean, there just isn't enough focus on other forms of diversity. And Warren Partners, actually founded by a lady, Joelle Warren, who's not Asian, but they are really doing spearheading work in thinking about sort of ethnic minorities, putting, programs in place to help ethnic minorities get board positions. And Khurram Hussain's been an amazing an amazing mentor and support for me and many others in that space. And then the third person, I sort of wavered a bit between this. It was kind of a tie between my mum, my sister, and Sadiq Khan.
So I think that's an interesting one. Your mum, your sister, or Sadiq Khan. You imagine slipping your mum and your sister shout out there. Still in a
I did like 85. Was that 4? What did I just do? 5 or 4? 4, 5. 5.
Well,
yeah,
it's fine.
Whatever.
Yeah. Next quick fire question is: how can people find out more about you, find out more about ETFuels and other stuff you've got going on?
Yeah. Okay. So ETFuels, www.et, I think it's a dash or a hyphen, et-fuels.com, our website. I do loads of humble bragging on LinkedIn about all the amazing things that we're doing. I'm sure we all do it, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Insta. I am on Facebook, but LinkedIn is, I feel like I plug LinkedIn so much. I'm not sponsored by LinkedIn, but happy to connect with anyone who's interested on LinkedIn.
Is there anything that our audience might be able to help you with today?
Yeah, so this is a bit niche, but we are looking for electrical engineers, phenomenal electrical engineers, and power systems engineers. I know it's niche, but if anyone has phenomenal people in that space who are interested in green hydrogen, who live in Ireland, Spain, or the UK, or Texas, please get in touch, because people are everything, and we're looking for great people.
So thank you so much for coming on today, and I look forward to interviewing you again in person in a few weeks' time. Have you got any final words to the audience?
No, I just want to say, look, I really thank you for having me on the show. It's been a great chat. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and hang in there, everybody else. Struggle is real, and really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And so my third person would be Sadiq Khan. I think it's awesome that we've got so many brown people now in politics, and I love what he's doing with, making London open. I think that's a phenomenal tagline. And given that I'm born and bred in London, it's my favorite city in the world. Really proud that we have an Asian mayor to represent us.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us, and we don't think you realise how important you are, because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission, and you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.